Where to Ski. I'm your host, John Morgan. Today, we're not going to a new fancy resort, not a small little resort. We're not going to the Alps. We're not going to the Colorado Rockies or Alaska or whatever. We're exploring what happened to the weather this winter and what to look for to get the good white stuff. This has been a weird weather year. Thought it made sense to dive into why with some pros and ask them what weather patterns to look for to get the good stuff. You know, Colorado, Utah got totally slighted. The Alps, Northeast US, got pounded. So let's find out. My guests today are Alan Smith and Coen Stuart. Alan is based in Jackson, Wyoming. He's the meteorologist and operations manager for OpenSnow. He specializes in mountain weather forecasting. Coen is a contributing meteorologist for WePowder, based in Europe, and he is based in the Netherlands. He also has a cool hobby, but we'll get to that later. So, after this quick break, we'll talk to Alan and Coen and get the real deal on where the snow is, where it isn't, and where it might be. Gear up for untracked lines and deep days. Backcountry has Well, Alan, Coen, welcome to Where to Ski. I'm really excited to talk to you about this winter's weather patterns and what happened. Before we start diving deep into the discussion, our listeners probably would love to know more about each of you. Alan, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, sure. I'll start from the very beginning. I live out in Jackson, Wyoming now and have for over a decade. I'm originally from Greenville, South Carolina, at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the southern Appalachians. So not what you would maybe expect for powder skiing, but growing up there, I became interested in weather at a very young age. I grew up in what I would call the Weather Channel era in the 90s when the Weather Channel got really popular and they would have like the local on the eights with the, cool, smooth jazz music. But they would also publish these videos of like tornado chasing and hurricanes and all this stuff that as a little kid who was a weather nerd, I thought was super cool. I also got very interested in snow at a young age, even though it only snowed 1 to 3 times a year where I grew up. So it's not very often, but it was enough that it would always get you really excited, enough to get to cancel school. And so that was always something I was looking forward to. And in the Blue Ridge Mountains, we also had some really interesting microclimates there. So not a lot of people know this, but the mountains in Western North Carolina, which were only a couple hours where I was from, there's 60 peaks that are, there's 40 peaks that are over 6,000 feet there, whereas the lower elevations there are 1,000 feet or less. So you get quite a bit of vertical relief, and they would get some pretty epic snowstorms. Sometimes in the 90s growing up, they would get like 3 to 4 plus foot dumps above 5,000 feet. So our parents would take us up to the Blue Ridge Parkway sometimes after big storms to go play in the snow, go sledding. So those were some pretty good memories growing up. When I was in my late teens, early 20s, I really got interested in the outdoors, hiking and skiing, especially. I started picking up skiing, took a few trips out west, got really into it. When I was in my early 20s, I moved out to Jackson Hole then initially and worked at a ski shop. And that was in 2007, 2008. And that was just extremely fortunate timing because that was the biggest winter on record in Jackson Hole. The upper mountain there got over 600 inches of snow that season. And so I was skiing almost every day and just really got into it that season. It was pretty amazing. And that was back before, everybody, people knew about Jackson Hole back then, but it was not nearly as crowded as it is now. And so you just kind of had the whole mountain to yourself back then. It was pretty amazing. After that, I moved down to Denver, Colorado and lived there for about 7 years. And I ended up pursuing a meteorology degree while I lived there at Metro State University in Denver. And that was a fantastic experience. We had great professors, good experience in the local weather community. Denver Boulder has a really strong weather community presence. I ended up interning with private forecasting company while I was in school there. And then I ended up working for them full time for a while after that. And it was a remote job mostly. So after I picked up that job, I decided I wanted to move back up to the mountains and ended up coming back up to Jackson Hole. And that was in 2015. And around the end of 2019 was when I left that job and started working for OpenSnow. And at first I got onto OpenSnow as a forecaster for British Columbia because that was actually where the need was then. And then once I was there for a year, then I picked up the Teton forecasting for Jackson Hole and Grand Targhee. And I started picking up some other forecasting zones too. I started doing a forecast for all of North America and picking up more and more work on the business side of things as well. And eventually started working full time at OpenSnow. And I've been there ever since then. And it's been a great experience. It's a wonderful company to work for. We have a really tight, close knit team, and we're all scattered across North America as well. And we work remotely, and then we meet up as a team in person once or twice a year.
That's pretty cool. When you were in Denver and Boulder, did you ever go up to NCAR in Boulder and do any work out of there?
I toured it. I never actually worked there, but I have toured the facility. It's a pretty awesome place.
Yeah, I used to live near there, and it's pretty cool. Coen, tell us about yourself. You're based in the Netherlands.
Alan is talking about the mountains all the time, and he's making me jealous. I'm from Europe. I'm from the Netherlands, and our highest mountain is not even a mountain; it's a hill. It's like 1,000 feet. And my country is more famous for ice skating actually than skiing. It's too hot in the winters nowadays often, but our country is famous for ice skate race. It's like 120-mile ice skating in midwinter. So ice skating country, but I was also into weather very early. I think when I was 8, I was running outside every day in winter, looking out how cold it was and if it was going to snow or not. So the weather is in my system from the early days, and I started working for a weather company called Meteo Group. It was the biggest commercial weather company in Europe at the time. Worked there for a long time. In the end, we became part of DTN. You might have heard of it. It's partly a weather business, but it's also it was grown big in ag, I believe, and also in energy. U.S. company. I worked there for a long time, also for the Dutch National Met Service. Currently for an energy company, also doing energy forecasting. But also since I was young, my parents took me skiing. Still grateful for that. We went to the Alps, little town in Austria called Alp, with only 2 small lifts. But I think winter got into my system very early in here in the Netherlands for ice skating, but also for skiing. And I've been skiing ever since. On piste skiing for the first 20 years, and then in my mid-20s I started doing off-piste course. Avalanche courses, and since then done a lot of tours in the Alps with a guide. Enjoying the beautiful backcountry skiing. And actually, since this season, I picked up weather forecasting for WePowder. It's a off-piste skiing community, skiing and snowboarding community here in the Netherlands, and we basically during the season make forecasts for off-piste and snowboard enthusiasts that want to plan trips to go to the Alps to find some powder, and it takes a day to get there. So it takes planning, and their motto is chasing powder is not by chance, it's a choice. So you just have to plan the right time to go, and that's what we try to facilitate for them. So that's what I currently do, and that's how you found us, John.
Yeah, you have a pretty interesting hobby too that you told me about the other day. Maybe we touch on that for a second.
Yeah, I can. I was actually in Boulder doing that last year. I'm a tornado chaser as well. So first time I think it was in 2000. It was even before the Twister film that my friends from my previous job, they went to the States to chase tornadoes. At that time, we depended on the Weather Channel, Ellen, to look at the weather forecast and see, where the storms were getting. We knocked on doors at hotels. Can we please look at the Weather Channel briefly? Nowadays you use the satellite dish on your van or the Wi-Fi or mobile satellite, etc. But yeah, I've been doing that for 20 years, John, and it's I would say it's even harder than powder chasing. Storm chasing is harder than powder chasing, but it's evenly fun. But I have to go to the States for that.
That's a pretty cool side project. So, Alan, let's start with you.
I've done some storm chasing a few times too, and I agree with Coen. It's a lot harder than powder forecasting. Down a small storm in a big area, yeah, it's tough.
Well, the consequences can be a little tougher too.
Yeah, you have to get it right. Especially, your route choices are the most important part of tornado chasing. But we're here for the snow, right?
We're here for the snow. So, Alan, let's start with the worst of the worst. What the hell happened in Colorado and Utah this year? It's about as bad as I've seen in many years. There are a couple of years in the 70s where it was bad. There was a year or so in the 80s where it was not very good. But what kind of weather patterns did we have this year that really just took the snow right out of the forecast?
Yeah, it was a pretty brutal winter. It really took a lot of things coming together in just the wrong way for this to happen. And really the main driver was there was a blocking ridge of high pressure over the western US most of the winter. It's set up in early November, and it was persistent throughout November. That allowed for unseasonable warmth to build underneath that ridge, and it just had a tough time relenting all season long. Once that warmth built, it really acted as a feedback mechanism, and that high pressure ridge was persistent all year long. You would occasionally have a storm come through, break it down for a couple days, but then it would build right back up after that. And it was just extremely stubborn, more so than usual. And it was a dry winter for at least further south across Colorado and the Southwest US, especially. It was a dry winter, but it was really the warmth that was unusual this winter. I mean, it was the warmest winter in some places by far on record across the Western US. And that had arguably a bigger impact on the snow conditions than just a lack of precipitation. And like I said, that warmth just built upon each other early in the season, and there were never any Arctic air masses from the north that could really break down that warmth. You would get some more modified cold fronts coming off the Pacific every once in a while, cool things off, bring some snow for a couple days, but then the ridge kept regenerating, building back up. The further north you went was interesting because some places from Tahoe and Utah into the northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest, precipitation was actually near to even above average this winter, which seems odd for being such a poor snow winter. But what happened was there were a lot of atmospheric river events that set up. So on the northern periphery of this high pressure ridge, you had a strong jet stream coming in from the Pacific, bringing subtropical moisture in. So it was bringing some very wet systems at times, especially in December and February. But it was the warm air underneath that high pressure ridge was so unusually warm as it was building north. It was causing a lot of these storms to come in and bring rain up to unusually high elevations and at a much higher frequency than normal. So areas that you would normally be getting heavy snow in the winter, they were getting rain or mixed precipitation. And also the snow liquid ratios were much lower than normal because of the warm air. So even where it was snowing, you were getting, for the amount of precipitation you were getting, it was generating less snowfall than it normally would if temperatures were colder. So it was really that confluence of events. And from a large scale, we had a weak La Nina year, but we also, another factor we look into is the quasi-biennial oscillation, or QBO, which is a measure of upper level trade winds in the tropics. And that has an effect on Northern Hemisphere weather as well. And it oscillates between easterly and westerly phases. This year we were in an easterly phase. And in the past, if you have an easterly QBO combined with a weak La Nina year, we've found that tends to favor these blocking patterns where you're more likely to have high pressure ridging over the western US, whereas in the eastern US, you're more likely to have a dip in the jet stream with deeper troughing that could bring colder air and stormier weather in. And that also causes polar vortex disruptions, which you hear a lot about in the winter. It doesn't cause it, it favors it. You tend to get more polar vortex disruptions. Polar vortex disruptions favor colder Arctic air dipping into the central and eastern US, but usually when the jet stream dips in the east, it tends to bulge up further west, and so you get the more persistent high pressure. And so in our fall forecast this year, or excuse me, our winter forecast that we published in the fall, we were actually expecting warmer than average temperatures in the west this year because we were seeing this pattern ahead of time, and we did call for below average snowfall from California to Utah to Colorado. And then we had equal chances across the Northwest US up into Canada. And so in some ways, it wasn't that surprising that we had this type of winter. But what was a surprise was just how extreme it was, since we were setting warm temperature records all winter long, not just for part of the season, but pretty much from November to March. A lot of areas had their warmest 4 to 5 month winter period on record.
Yeah, it's crazy. We were talking a little earlier about snowmaking. You were talking about natural snow, but even with the snowmaking, it was so warm. For example, in Utah, there were places that they couldn't make snow. It was too warm, so they couldn't get the base down to have snowfall on top of it, which is crazy. Does a pattern like that persist very often year after year, or is it a single year pattern that gets disrupted, hopefully?
You have to say no, Alan.
Yes, well, you'll be happy to hear that the answer is no. Every winter is unique. So, well, there could be some ocean atmosphere similarities. There's going to be enough difference that you're never going to get the same kind of winter 2 years in a row. So I think it's pretty safe to say that there's nowhere to go but up next winter.
Yeah, except for the guys in the Northeast. When Jay Peak has as much snow as they do in Jackson. It's crazy.
That's true. The Northeast had a very good winter this year. They may be coming back down to reality next year, possibly. I mean, we'll see.
Well,
but
once every 10 years, the guys in the East have got to get some of the goods.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Coen, the patterns that he's talking about there, they really don't affect Europe that much. You have different patterns that you see over there that set Europe up for some really heavy dumps. And
I would say in the US the jet stream comes from the west, right? So comes from the Pacific. So La Nina, El Nino are Pacific sea patterns, sea surface temperature patterns. And in Europe, the jet comes over the Atlantic. So we look at the Atlantic Ocean, and La Nina, El Nino have a very small indirect effect sometimes in Europe, but it's hardly recognizable. And this year we didn't see it. So in Europe, we mostly look at persistent weather pattern, large scale weather patterns. So where are the high pressure areas being persistent, or where are the lower area pressure systems persistent, and that determines the flow, and therefore also from what side the winds or the jet reaches the Alps, and that basically determines if there will be snow and where. So it's a little bit less predictable, although I would say also with a La Nina or El Nino, in general, you could say in the US it's tends to be wetter than normal, but exactly where is probably still also hard to pinpoint. The Alps are even a smaller scale, so If you look at the Rockies are pretty much north-south oriented from Canada into New Mexico. The Alps are more west-east oriented, and with the jet stream normally coming in from the west, it has to be either a pretty direct hit to hit the Western Alps, or you get like a meandering flow where the jet stream comes in from the south or north. But it really depends on, the large scale patterns, how that turns out.
So I'm going to stay with you for a second, Coen. The weather this year in the Alps, the snow came in real dumps. There was a dump in December. January was slow. Then February, there was another dump. It was not like you get 6 inches,
No.
6 inches a day. You got 3 feet. You got a meter at a shot.
Yeah, it was a really, really weird winter. If you look from a commercial perspective, it was good, but it didn't really. It's more determined by the cold or by the temperatures than by snow. Because I looked it up before our podcast, and in the US, maybe 20-25% in general of pieces uses artificial snow. What I could see, and in Europe, it's more 70-80% of pieces are at least partly depending on artificial snow. And as you said earlier, if temps are too high, you cannot use artificial snow because you cannot put on the snow cannon. So you either have to have snow or cold enough temperatures. And the commercial seasons, we had a good start of the season, way above average in November. So everybody was happy. Season started great, but after that, between end of November and end of December, there was like a 5-week dry spell, and it became warm and cold and warm and cold. It ruined the snow deck. So there was little snow, and then everybody's off around New Year, and there was not a lot of snow in many places except for the west. They got some storms with Christmas, but elsewhere, luckily it turned cold, so they put on the snow cannons and they could ski. But there was really, really little snow on the ground, and that basically in the west of the Alps, that shifted late December, early January. So there was a lot of snow then. But because of the poor snow before that, there were a lot of weak, persistent layers in the snow. So for piste skiing, it was fine. Off-piste skiing, it was really, really, really dangerous this season. And we had a lot of fatal accidents across the Alps, actually, until mid-February. So we had a few dumps in early January from Christmas onwards. And then there was another 3-week dry spell. And then it really, really dumped in February, just before the holiday season in February, which made everybody happy for skiing. But it was like 3 to 6 feet in some places. So there were a lot of big resorts in the French Alps, like La Plagne, that really shut down for a day or two. You couldn't get in, you couldn't get out. Avalanche risk category 5, so there wasn't much to do, but they had snow, and by that, those big dumps, eventually the avalanche risk got down. I think in Switzerland they had a record of 6 weeks where the avalanche risk was at least substantial, like category 3. It never happened before for such a long time. So it was for off-piste skiing, which is my, the group we sort of facilitate. It was terrible until mid-February because there either was no snow or it was too tricky. So you couldn't do much. But from mid-February, it got better. And actually in Austria, they're always waiting for dumps from the north. They didn't happen at all until mid-March. So the last 2 weeks, and it ended, I think, on April 1st, we had 2 big dumps from the north. And like end of season. So everybody was like, okay, summer season is finished. It's not going to happen anymore. And then suddenly we got 2 dumps from the north. And even until now, the conditions, even though some resorts are starting to close, the conditions are actually pretty good because of the late snow in the Alps. So we started very early, then quiet for weeks and weeks, and then we end up very well in the end.
I've been hearing some reports out of like Tyrol and stuff. They said last week was like January skiing.
It was last week of March was the best week of the season. And like until and you have to remember that we got normally a lot of wet snow, like what you get in the West, Whistler or California, comes from the ocean. So we don't have the champagne powder normally, unless it's cold. But we had snow from the north in March, and those resorts they start at 2,000-3,000 feet, and they end at 6,000 feet. So they really need cold air and snow, and that's actually what happened in March. So they got cold powder snow end of season. So that's what they wanted, but they had to wait for it for a long time.
Yeah, and you were talking about the avalanches and avalanche danger. It was crazy over there for a while in February. It was just wild.
Yeah, I actually called up a guy that I knew from early days when I went skiing with guys a lot, and I talked to him. I said, what do you do? Because you have to be so cautious. And he said, yeah, it's really tricky because even, first of all, in these conditions, you should not ski where you don't know. We say in Holland, the where you ski down the slope. If you don't know the slope exactly and you haven't skied it before, don't even think about it. So you have to know it by heart. Otherwise, don't do it at all. But he said even those slopes I cannot ski this season. So it's really very, very soft gradients. And it's really hard because they get people. They need to show people around, but and then they have to say, we can't ski this, we can't ski that. Sorry, but safety first. So it's also for the people in the Alps that make a living out of it. It was very, very hard because they say a good guide is an old guide. It's fooled even guides this year. It was that dangerous.
Well, and having the freeze warm cycles made that persistent layer down at the base, and getting a lot of new snow. It's heavy enough; it just goes. And Alan, you had the same problem out west, and a few places where there were some pretty. Everyone heard about the avalanche in Tahoe, but there were a lot of avalanches out there for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a bad year for avalanches. I think. People that might not be know that much about skiing, they probably think it's weird that in a poor snow year that avalanches were worse. But actually, there is some correlation there because in a less snowy winter, when you have longer dry spells or bigger temperature fluctuations in between storms, that creates bigger weak layers that fail more easily once you do get a storm. And so we had a lot of that out west this winter, and I think. I'm not going to say this for the California accent because that was its own tragedy and its own set of circumstances. But I also have noticed that in less snowy winters out west, it seems like anecdotally that when it does snow, people are maybe more like powder hungry because they haven't gotten their fix this year. So they might be pushing it a little bit more and compared to snowier years when they're skiing powder more frequently. So it seems like that combined with the fact that a lighter snowpack is a weaker snowpack maybe leads to more accidents. I saw that here last weekend. During most of March was just ridiculously warm and dry in the West, but then there was a pretty big storm last week around the first couple of days of April, and the Tetons got about 16 to 20 inches of snow over a couple of days. And then the first day the sun came out on Saturday, a bunch of people just flooded the backcountry, and I want to say there were 4 or 5 skier triggered avalanches where skiers actually got caught to some extent. And one person injured their leg and had to be heli rescued. And so it was just one of those cases of, everybody was wanting to get out because there hasn't been many good powder days this season, but it also coincided with a spike in avalanche risk. And there were a lot of issues. Thankfully, no fatalities or anything like that, but
it's almost like a perfect storm to be able to generate conditions that do that. And you're right, I hadn't thought of that, but when there's no snow, people go further and farther afield and probably don't know the area as well. And, they don't look above them as much.
Right.
So what would be a great pattern going in? I'm not going to ask you for a forecast for next winter. That's a little premature for that. But what kind of pattern would you look for, do you think, going into next winter that would be good for snow?
Yeah, I mean, really any kind of pattern where you're avoiding these long duration blocking ridges of high pressure. I mean, if you have high pressure pop up for a few days every now and then, like that's fine. But the real thing, at least that I like to look for, is a good pattern. Well, for one, having temperatures that are at least average to below average. So you're getting cold air to ensure that snow levels are low and that snow quality is going to be good. And the other thing would then just be like a consistency of storms. If it's great if it snows every day, but even if it happens a few times a week, as long as you're getting like refreshes on a regular basis, that to me creates the best conditions. I would even say my favorite kind of pattern, just personally as a skier, is if you get kind of like day after day of like small to medium sized storms coming in where it's snowing like 3 to 5 inches every day, because those tend to not attract like the big powder day crowds compared to if you get 15
Yeah.
on a report. But and you just get these consistent sneaky powder days where you're not hitting anything underneath. You've got a bottomless base, and it's just consistent. You know what you're going to get every day. And
well, that's what you look for. You look for the consistency, not the big dumps. The big dumps are actually hard to ski.
Call me, Alan. Call me when it happens.
Yeah, right.
Hello, United. I'm booking a flight.
Yeah, for sure.
I know. It's funny how our ideal pattern rarely works out the way we envision it.
Well, there's no such thing as a perfect winter. That never happens. It's it's just life in general. Coen, what kind of pattern do you look for to have consistent good skiing in the Alps? And the Alps are varied. You're going all the way from eastern France up into the Dolomites. That's a long distance too, and as you said, it's east to west, so it gets very different going from point A to point B.
True. So if you look at the southern Alps, like the Dolomites, they often get snow like only a few times a winter, but when they do, they get like easily 1 to 2 feet. So, and in between they have three weeks of summer, or not summer, but sunshine, and they use the artificial snow. So what you want there is an early start in December with a southerly flow, good 1 or 2 good dumps, and then they have a good base, and they can work with that, and they have the mechanical stuff to continue to work with it, and then they have a few upgrades during the season. That's good enough for the south, and that's what they normally get. In the west, it's a bit different, because there, when the jet stream comes in from the west, which is a bit more often, they usually get easily 2 feet, because it's so high up. Chamonix, how much? It's 14,000 feet. So it's a little bit like the highest peaks in Colorado. If storms come in from the west there, they always get a lot of snow. It's a little bit as high as that in French Alps. So, and those there, the resorts are more high up, like 6,000 to 9,000 feet often. So they keep the snow better conserved because it's higher up. So again, a few good storms early season, and then they can come from a long way. If you go to the northern Alps, so Switzerland, places like Engelberg, Adelboden, Davos, or the Arlberg region in Austria, they get the best snow from the northwest and north, and they get in a normal season they get much more frequent storms. So they get less often, but they get way more frequent storms. And when the storms come, they come from the north, which means also often colder air. So they have a really different kind of snow climate, I would say. Those are also the places on average that get the most snow, like 400 inches, while the south gets like 200 inches of snow a season. So it's quite a big difference. So perfect scenario is a jet stream from the west to northwest, low pressure areas around southern Scandinavia, which bring the storms in from the west to northwest. But there's always a trick there that if storms get a little bit westerly to southwesterly, warm air comes in with the storms, and then you get some bumps in the snow line. So you can get rain up to like 5,000 feet, which you don't want. So west to northwesterly flow is the best for France and the northern Alps. And for the southern Alp, you need the southerly flow once in a while, because otherwise, they get the style föhn effect. So they get the snow in the north and the wind and the sunshine in the south. So it really depends on where you go in the Alps, what kind of pattern you would prefer.
Okay, no, it's a pretty complex pattern you've got over there to be able to have it. It's different for each of the regions.
It definitely is. It's quite a complex situation, but that's why it's fun for me as a meteorologist, right? So we really try to pinpoint to the regions where we advise the people to go for the powder. Yeah.
So I'm gonna keep going here on this. Alan, you live in Jackson. I assume you get to ski Jackson Hole like daily.
I used to. I wouldn't say I get over there daily anymore. The irony is I'm pretty busy in the winter now, so it makes it.
Well, you took on all these other regions. You got to stop saying yes.
I know.
But, is that still your favorite place to ski?
I mean, I like both Jackson Hole and Grand Targhee, to be honest. They're both great mountains. It's kind of, each one's a little bit of a different experience. Like you go to Jackson Hole for the really steep, extreme terrain, long runs. You get a 4,000 foot vertical from top to bottom. So it covers a lot of area. And you get more of like the resort, a big resort feel there as well. And Teton Village is kind of set up to be a ski resort. Then over at Grand Targhee, it's just a different feel. It's about the same size acreage wise. So they're both pretty big mountains. They're both about 2,600 acres. Grand Targhee has about half the vertical that Jackson does, so about a 2,000 foot vertical, but it does have a higher base elevation. So the snow conditions tend to be a bit more consistent. It gets skied a bit less than Jackson Hole does too. It's a smaller base area resort. It gets more of you definitely do get out of towners go there, especially powder seekers. But overall, it's a little more laid back, I would say, than Jackson Hole is. So they both offer awesome experiences, just a little bit different. But interestingly, over the course of the winter, snowfall averages are very similar. Granted, Jackson Hole, some of their measurements are on the upper portions of the mountain, whereas Grand Targhee measures snowfall right around mid-mountain, but still about from about 8,800 to 9,500 feet. Snowfall averages are about 450 per year. So it's typically really consistent snowfall on both sides of the range, which is cool.
Yeah, Targhee's a pretty cool area. I've been there. I was there years ago, and it's like stepping back in time a little bit.
It is. Yeah. They're definitely growing, though. They've been upgrading their lift system. They added a new lift that expanded their terrain a couple years ago. So depending on when you were there last, it probably has updated a bit.
I hope so. God, I hope so. What do
Yeah.
you do? What do you get to do in the summer up there besides you're not skiing and you're forecasting, but you're doing a different type there?
Yeah, definitely. I love the summers out here, to be honest. They're pretty amazing. I love hiking. I mean, up in the Tetons, you can really go on some long hikes, a lot of good variety. I really enjoy mountain biking too. There's some great biking trails around here in the Tetons. And then if you can go 4 to 6 hours in any direction to explore around the Rockies. And yeah, it's a good time.
It's pretty spectacular up there. Coen, where do you like to ski? What's your favorite?
Hmm. So yeah, I was thinking about that. I think in Austria, I like the atmosphere. I think best in Austria. They call it gemütlich. It's just like wooden, old-fashioned hotels, and everybody drinks beer after skiing. Like the après ski is they like it. It's a bit of the Austrian way of skiing. While I think in France, for example, and in Switzerland, they're much more into we just ski and then everybody goes to their hotels. Um, but I say from a ski area, the Ischl area in Austria is I really like because it's really high up and it's a huge amount of terrain. I don't know how many acres I have to say, but it's really big and it's really secure snow-wise because it's high up. And in France, I would say the La Plagne-les Arcs combination is really, really good for skiing. There's so many opportunities there. And it's also very high up, so you don't have to worry about the snow too much. But of course, if you want to go off-piste skiing, you want to go where people do not go, right? So you have to find your little gem depending on what the snow is like. If you want to be how the weather is and what kind of skiing you want, you just pick your favorite spot. And I've been in Andermatt, La Tuile on the border of France and Italy. There's so many places. But the picture behind me, that's actually the US. It's in Telluride. I really I liked it there also really a lot because the valleys are much wider in the Rockies in general, at least there. In Europe, the Alps are the valleys are much tighter, so the views are much broader there in the US. And I really like to go back to ski in the States as well, I would say, but. I can definitely recommend many places in the Alps as well.
You mentioned a couple of good ones in there, and I've been to those, and they're fun skiing. So in the summer, what do you do besides your chasing of tornadoes? What do you like?
That's spring, right? Chasing tornadoes is in spring. I like biking as well. Often race bike or gravel bike. I was in the Dolomites last summer for a week of gravel biking. Really, really, really nice. So I actually like the mountains as well. And my wife does too, which helps. So we can go with the family. It's and I live in the east of the Netherlands, so it's not that crowded here as well. But I cannot just ride out and ride into the mountains. I would love that, but that's not an option for me. So I have to pick my my holidays for that, and I do. So often France or Italy. I think Italy is my favorite country for the mountains.
So Coen, people can find your forecasts on WePowder, correct? How do people find the WePowder? It's right online. I found it pretty easily, but
yeah, it's wepowder.com/en from English. So you can find forecast there in English. In the season, we update them almost daily. We're now end of season, so we do it a little bit less. But yeah, you can visit the website, look at the forecast, and we also offer forecast there, or you can put a subscription on the powder alerts that we issue. We issue powder alerts when we see dumps come in, so people can start planning. And that's how we facilitate. And we have a subscription for people that want detailed forecasts. We also offer a sort of a safety center where you can do avalanche courses online. Because of course, if we want to have people go there, we want to be sure that they know what to do, right? So we offer that as well. But just visit the website wepowder.com/en. We can put it in the show notes.
Yep, it will be in the show notes.
And you will, if you think WePowder, then you will find us.
Okay, so that's for Europe. Now for the U.S., how do we find OpenSnow? And let us know how we get there, Alan.
Yeah, we have a website and an app. So if you're on the web, opensnow.com, the app OpenSnow, search OpenSnow, all one word, download the app. You can download the app. There is a free version. Most of our data does require a subscription upgrade, but we think it's worth it if you're a skier or any kind of outdoor enthusiast. We also offer year-round mountain forecast. We have point forecasts for any location, elevation in the world, ski areas, of course, but then you can, if you're backcountry touring, you can point and click on our map, get a forecast for any elevation location. And then we have local forecasters who cover different regions around North America and around the world as well for kind of the insider forecasts, similar to what WePowder does.
That's awesome. So there you go. You've got places to go for both continents. Alan, Coen, I want to thank you guys so much for joining us today. I learned a lot, actually. I'm just a newbie, not a newbie, but I'm a neophyte at this area. And it always helps to get an idea what to look for. And sometimes I like to dissect what the hell happened. If you like our podcasts, please share them and subscribe on our website, wheretoski.org. It's free. Stay connected to us to listen to perspectives on some of the world's best mountains from the legends that live there. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Coen. Thank you all for joining. And many thanks to our partners, Backcountry and Global Rescue. And thanks to the Grits for the music.